Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. Some individuals go on quests to find themselves. Others to really lose themselves, to discard their old life, their old experiences, the buildings and homes they once inhabited, and to find some new identity, new voice, something that will be better for themselves, for those around them. Some do go on quests and they find these best versions of themselves. But others find the worst versions of themselves. And that's what we have in Reinhardt's Garden by Mark Haber, one of my favorite contemporary writers. Here we have a group of individuals who are going deeper and deeper into the forests of South America. They're tracing up towards the source of the Rio de la Plata. And they're in search of this philosopher, this individual who's going to help them discover the real sense of origin of their identities, of their desires, and of this quest for melancholy that paradoxically is a quest for happiness. But that journey is harrowing, and it's leading to a deeper and deeper, more chthonic self, and an original self that is frightening and terrifying in many ways, that is callous. And so the book seems like, from that summary, to be quite depressing, and yet it's absolutely hilarious, because Haber is satirizing all of these individuals to a brilliant degree. What we have is really a post-Enlightenment Don Quixote, a group of individuals who have been on this quest, but it's also a quest of philosophy. They're trying to find the true sense of how their lives should be governed, the goals they should be aiming for, the intellectual and emotional selves that they need to tap into and embrace, and this embrace of melancholy. And they're off on this quest for the brilliant philosopher who seems almost totally unknown, Carrasquilla, who has disappeared. And so we're at the dawn of the 20th century, heading into a dangerous place, a place where there may not be, fresh water, a place where they may not have enough food, and yet it's a place teeming with water, teeming with food, but not perhaps what they're used to. And the book is just unbelievably funny and also unbelievably heartbreaking at times. We have Yakov Reinhardt, the Croatian German dilettante who's incredibly wealthy, and he's been able to use that to just fund his researches, build weird, strange, postmodern, before there's any modernism to be post, about castles in Stuttgart. We have his unnamed amanuensis, his secretary, the man he found in a spa, a hospital spa in Europe, and who's traveled with him for several years now. And we have Ulrich, who was originally sent to essentially kill the characters, but instead took the money and is now on the quest with them. And we were introduced to a couple of other characters as the book progresses, but they go deeper and deeper into their heart of darkness. And it's one that, to a certain degree, they've dug for themselves. They're not just discovering that reality can be awful, but they're finding the worst version of reality they could inhabit, and then trying to embrace it such that they can. But I want to read a passage with Haber's voice to just give a sense of what these characters sound like. I trembled at the enormous still lifes across his walls, the Goya towering in the adjoining room, the only painting, he claimed, that ever approached the turmoil of his soul. I then gazed at 4 paintings that had captivated me ever since Yakov inquired them on a trip to Holland, paintings that lured my unconscious with their thick streaks of lustrous blue and stark red, a series titled Trembling of the Soul. Soldiers depicted in a barren field up to their knees in snow, the men symbolizing agents of death, or perhaps the brevity of life, or maybe the yawning chasm of an existence devoid of meaning. Yakov wasn't sure, but all 4 paintings spoke to one another and only succeeded, in fact, when placed together. As useless separated, he insisted, as a man's top half would be were it separated from his lower. Yakov was so enraptured he purchased the entire series, as well as a triptych of naked Romanian gypsies, all packed and sent to his castle in Stuttgart, occupied in his absence by one-legged Sonia, a retired prostitute, an ex-lover of Yakov's, and an invaluable housekeeper, the only person, in fact, he trusted enough to care for his estate, since Yakov demanded all sorts of eccentric cleaning routines based in large part on his desire for seclusion, his paranoia to germs, and his obsession with dust, not its eradication, but its preservation. Dust being emblematic of melancholy and the harbinger perhaps of a deeper, more divine melancholy that would be closer to reaching the pure path of unfettered melancholy, which would be akin to finding a new planet. Yakov worshipped dust, he once confessed. I stand at the altar of dust, he said. Dust is not only divine, he affirmed. It's more important than the soil itself. Yakov could expand for hours on dust, how dust is the most significant element in the universe. Not millions of isolated particles like most believe, but something wholly of itself, as singular and unified as fog. A home laden with dust, he explained, invites melancholy at its leisure. It doesn't insist or make demands, but beckons, he said. And the soul is encouraged to reflect on darker, more substantial notions, since the dust in a window, for example, creates a film that distorts the natural world. Just as melancholy darkens one's worldview, he continued, not to alter reality, but to transpose reality, to elevate reality, to improve reality. Dust does the same. All those philosophical impostors, as Yakov called them, those vulgar and insignificant non-entities he stewed, who consider melancholy an affliction of the soul, those same shallow cretins also see dust as an affliction. They demand it be swept up, eradicated, forgotten. And you can see the just absolutely warped world these characters inhabit, Reinhardt in particular. And yet the voice is brilliant throughout the book, as in the works of Thomas Bernhard, where we have a narrator who constantly is writing down what someone else says, who's writing out these long winding conversations that have occurred. We have that in Reinhardt's Garden, because we have Jakob Reinhardt with his voice, this just brutal sense that is so strange and seems utterly, viewing reality from a perspective at a slant that most of us are never touching, with good reason. But we also have our unnamed narrator, this man who just sees Reinhardt almost as a prophet, as the man who's saved his life in a sense by giving him this purpose, who is guiding him on this quest that he himself would never have found on his own or sought out on his own. And yet he also views Reinhardt with this jaundiced view of like, wait a second, what have we gotten ourselves into? Or this was really dangerous. And why did Reinhardt think that? Or why did he say that? I'm confused. And there's much in which our narrator's confusion allows us to start to see just how confused these individuals are as they grope towards what they think is the truth. And so we constantly have these reminiscences as they're journeying. Apparently it's 60 days at a time, though it's unclear how time is passing for these characters. But as the characters are journeying, the narrator is constantly, remembering, how did he meet Reinhardt? What was Sonia like when she had two functioning legs? Ultimately, what was the accident that caused her to lose one of her legs? And so we have, how did they meet Ulrich, this man who's seeming to be the one who can keep them safe on this journey, not himself from South America as they journey through Uruguay and deeper towards Central South America, but someone who has been focused on training dogs, and we see the limitations of that role. And so constantly, Haber is giving us this brilliantly rendered world, but also one that is rendered with doubt because of the narrator's voice. And so what culminates is not just this brilliant meditation on melancholy or on philosophy or on the way in which someone who views himself or herself as a messiah, as a prophet of some new worldview, is going to warp things. And we find just how Reinhardt has taken Carrasquilla's ideas and inverted many of them ultimately. We also see the humor that must align any of these pronouncements, that if this is true, it's brilliant, but if it's not true, even by the slightest, it's absolute balderdash. And where does that leave us? And so it really is, it's a brilliantly funny book, but it's also just a wonderfully book that captures a world that has disappeared. The world of pre-World War I Europe, where individuals could have these enormous tobacco fortunes and then squander them on building these absurd, castles, or these works of art where he doesn't bring in painters to paint his portrait. He brings in forgers, and that sense of just constantly undermining everything that seems noble and that seems to be a pursuit, whether of culture or of knowledge or of wisdom, and the differences between those. And so the book is wonderful. Very, very funny. I found it funnier than Saint Sebastian's Abyss. And I'm certainly excited to read Lesser Runes when that comes out this year, because Haber has really found a way to take voices like Bernhard or Cervantes or Lawrence Stern or Tolstoy, and then wrap them up into very fascinating works that I thoroughly enjoy. Um, and there are just so many little details in here that I don't want to spoil because it is a short book, but I would encourage folks to read these. And then if you read it, let me know, and let me know what you think of it. The title of Garden and the way that that plays with the forests that they're in, the jungles that they're wandering through, but also the way that Reinhardt has his origin books written in a language that only he can understand, and that he carries these. And ultimately, the ultimate fate of the characters and how that even inverts ideas around the Garden of Eden, I thought were brilliant. So I really loved this one. In terms of other books, I've already mentioned how we have, to a certain extent, a philosophical knight errant in Reinhardt, and his assistant and secretary, his Sancho Panza, in our narrator, and how that echoes Don Quixote. But additionally, I think Zama by Antonio di Benedetto, set much earlier in the European colonization of South America, with this functionary who is just having the worst time of his life, and ultimately going, off towards Asuncion, and then he has to leave from there on this quest after some bandits, and the life he experiences and just the hell that he discovers is, I think, a deep influence. Certainly Krasnohorkai with his Melancholy of Resistance. This is quoted in as part of the epigraph, opening epigraphs to Reinhardt's Garden, and it seems very influential. Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy is, of course, there. This is just a brilliant book, a book that scatters as many ideas as Haber is, and then pursues them to their endpoints, to infinite infinite limits that are approached in this book. And the way that it just Burton takes so much scholarship and examines so many aspects of the human condition, and it's filled with quotations, it's filled with reading, and in a sense, this is what Reinhardt is trying to produce, is some new anatomy of melancholy. I think there's a sense of the satirizing Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, and the way that sick characters, rather than remaining in a place, go off on these different journeys and pursue their own melancholies. The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy is a deep influence on the character of Reinhardt, such that they go off on a quest to meet Tolstoy that ends predictably in disaster. And so that's an influence. I think the voice of Bernhard is very present, whether it's Old Masters or Concrete, or particularly Gargoyles. I think with the prince in the second half of Gargoyles, echoing the many mental illnesses, almost the hobby horses that become obsessions of European nobility. Horacio Quiroga, the great Uruguayan short story writer and horror writer, is mentioned a couple of times, and he's truly one of the greats. Highly recommend his stories. I also thought of Galeano's Memory of Fire, and the way he shows that the collision and the incursion of Europeans upon South America wreaks absolute havoc on humans, on the earth itself, and we see, in a sense, Reinhardt and his little crew, they wreck their own tiny trail of havoc. It's not writ large, but it is nonetheless a trail of havoc on the lives of those around them and on their own lives. Certainly the idea of folks questing after a writer that they love recalls 2666, though I think Haber's sensibility is very different from Bolano's. And then finally, the idea of characters who are almost trapped in this environment, and it feels inescapable, and they're then meditating on what that means for their lives, and its significance recalls The Woman in the Dunes by Abe Kobo. So let me know, as I said, if you've read Reinhardt's Garden. I loved it, and I'd love to talk with others about it, on Voxer or something. So hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.